The first Hardline patch is out, and it claims to improve the Team Deathmatch spawns, but I still am reminded of the movie Looper every time I play Team Deathmatch, where the mob sends people back in time to be immediately shot as soon as they materialize. With 64 players on these small maps, it's probably never going to feel good. But my impression of the patch, the changes, was that at least on some maps, things were worse. Now maybe that's just players learning the maps and modes and figuring out that the most effective thing to do is just to camp the spawns. Why would you want to run into the building in the middle of the map with all its little corners and strange hiding spots and multiple levels and wait for other people to try and do the same thing so you can have your gunfight when you could just sit around the outside of the map where the spawns are and you know players are going to be? Now there's not a whole lot of tactics there. You just keep spinning around looking at the different spawn points where you know they are, waiting for some guy to pop in, and then it's quick reflexes, twitch shooter, keep your aim on the other guy and pull the trigger. When you're done, reload and try and get ready for the next guy because he's going to be spawning in on one of those nearby spawn points. The basic structure of a lot of these hardline maps really isn't conducive to Team Deathmatch. Instead, they're more after their objective game modes, Heist, Blood Money, and Conquest, where they have a small central point in the middle of the map that people are all trying to get into and fight together. And they'll have lots of cover and lots of different routes so they can get lots of players in that small area. You get lots of players in a small area, and it starts to attract more players who are just looking for gunfights, looking for action. Add in the squad spawns that lets players keep coming back in on their teammates who are still around and still in the fight, and having the regular spawn points, the regular you don't have any teammates to spawn on the outsides of the map, means there are fewer people on the outsides of the map, and so naturally players tend to congregate in towards the middle. But in Team Deathmatch, there isn't squad spawns. Yeah, you got the beacons, but that's unreliable, and you just get gunned down immediately if someone starts camping your beacon. And so again, players realize, hey, I could try to run into the middle of the map where there's lots of cover, lots of different routes, somebody could be camping all sorts of corners, could come in through any number of doors, and, well, given how things tend to play out, I don't have a lot of teammates already there to try and cover those different routes. And with more players coming in on the spawn points, it ends up feeling like there's not much time between when you spawn in on a spawn point and when an enemy could spawn in on a spawn point. Changing that so that you've got two sides fighting against each other at first sounds like a good idea, and then you realize, well, then all of your team is probably going to try to push into the enemy spawn camp that, and just kill the enemies as fast as possible. Like, if you know where the enemies are, you're going to try and run in there and get some kills. Some people are overly aggressive about it and push the spawns around at the detriment of everyone who is happily spawn camping away. Yes, I did spawn camp pretty hard in Call of Duty, especially Domination. But if you can slow that process down so that you get a proper spawn flip, things can still work out okay, and Call of Duty does this all the time. The good Call of Duty games do it very well. But in Hardline, with all the players on the small maps, there are some issues. One player getting behind a large group of enemies can start clearing them out fairly quickly, but not quickly relative to how fast they respawn, even with that long respawn timer. Now this is assuming some player managed a proper flank and got behind his enemies. Normally, in other game modes, that guy would have a bunch of his squad mates spawn on him, and the enemies would get pushed out of that area and their spawn would move. But that clearing out a large number of enemies, even when you're shooting them in the back and they're completely unaware of you, it takes time, and they're already going to be respawning somewhere else on the map, and then you've got another teammate pushing in on that spawn, and the entire thing turns into a big mess. In Hardline, sometimes it gets really bad because you've got spawn points that can see each other, that spawn looking at each other, and players from opposing teams will spawn in looking at the other team and just be in a gunfight between two spawn points. But that's where the long lines of sight are around the outside of the map between the spawn points. It's also where you can check your corners as you try to work your way around the map because there aren't a ridiculous number of routes through the area. And most of all, it's where you know enemies will be. The bank on Bank Job, the big mansion on Riptide or Hollywood Heights. Even if you're all hyped up on energy drinks and have a close range weapon, it's still like gambling to go into those buildings. Sure, your minimap can help out, but those buildings have lots of levels and keeping track of everything is really, really tricky. Right now, I feel like Dust Bowl may be the best map for Team Deathmatch, at least with 64 players in Hardline. You've got lots of cover in those little buildings around the outside of the map where people spawn in, but then there's the motel in the middle of the map that's a bit of a power position. It also serves as a place to congregate for players who aren't sure where else they should go. And unlike a lot of other large buildings in the middle of maps, it's not a death trap. The other thing it has is a lot of those streets around the motel mean that the center area of the map is fairly open. Of course, that's part of what makes it a power position. Riptide's kind of the same way, but the mansion has so many ways in and out that controlling it is really difficult, and otherwise you're just fighting over that very top roof, which, I don't know, it just is not fun for me. So I have to wonder, maybe selecting different playable areas for Team Deathmatch might help improve things. In some cases, that could mean the areas get smaller, but also spawn players closer to cover, so they're not going to have to run through a big open field if they want to get in a close-range gunfight with a SMG or shotgun. But then keep those longer lines of sight as they become the central feature on the map where players want to congregate around in Team Deathmatch. The sniper rifles, DMRs, battle rifles, assault rifles, all of that stuff, players want to get in those longer range gunfights where they think their weapons are going to be effective, not just hoping that the spawn that the player happened to come in on was the one at the right distance from where they'd been camping. Okay, so hypothetically on Riptide, what happens if we open up that other smaller house where rescue happens? And our actual stated goal here is to have a few people, not a lot, trying to snipe from one house to the other. Okay, in that case it might be a little too hard for players on one side to get to the other, and then everybody ends up sniping. But I think it's at least worth experimenting with. If they get the CTE up on Hardline, maybe it's worth a shot. Or say on Bank Job. This is a little trickier because the map can't get any bigger, but the package pickup point Charlie behind the cafe in that little corner is largely unused, partly because there's no way into the vault through the cafe. That's closed in Team Deathmatch. What if we moved a bunch of spawn points over into the cafe so more people were closer in towards the bank? Even if they don't open up that hole into the vault, it'll get people on the correct side of the street so they're not trying to run into sniper fire when they come out of their spawn points. And I think the goal for Bank Job is to get the fighting happening between the bank and the parking garage. Because right now, pretty much all the action, the major focal point is at that parking garage and in the parking behind the bank where the criminals spawn in and heist. Of course, the easiest solution, I think, is to just cut the number of players down, though Visceral doesn't seem to want to do that. I mean, I can understand why I've talked about this in my first Team Deathmatch commentary, but I think even cutting the number of players down to 48 doesn't even need to go down to 32. 48 would be enough to really make things make more sense, and the spawn points wouldn't be as active, and players would tend to congregate in towards the middle of the map more. Which really is the goal here. Let's have people fight over the middle of the map, not the spawn points out in the field. Anyway guys, thanks for watching, hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time.